It was on the 4th of July 1946 that a huge crowd of thousands gathered inside of Gdansk, and they saw a number of men and women go to the gallows for their executions. These were the former guards of Stutthof Concentration Camp, a site in Gdansk which was huge, and it was within these barbed wire fences of the site where around 65,000 prisoners were slaughtered by the barbarism of the conditions of the Nazi camp. Many of the guards had been recruited from the local area, and what shocked many was the age of some of the women, as they had exhibited such brutality, execution and torture whilst they were in their early 20s. But employed by the SS guards were a number of Carpos, or prisoner functionaries, as they were known, and these were prisoners who were given a small amount of power and responsibility over the inmates, yet they also went power mad, and many of these Carpos were involved in the deadly operations of the camp. They were hated by many, and some, when sites were liberated, were turned upon and were battered to death by the other inmates, but a number of Carpos of Stutthof were actually executed alongside the other former SS guards of the camp. Join us today as we look at the executions of the prisoner guards of Stutthof Concentration Camp, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Stutthof Concentration Camp was, to begin with, the earliest camp set up outside the borders of Germany during the Second World War, and it opened its doors on the 2nd of September 1939. It was a site which would be used to terrorise the Polish population, and many politicians, religious leaders and teachers were rounded up in the area of West Prussia, and the SS had created lists of those people who were to be arrested. These people became the first inhabitants and inmates of Stutthof, and they would be the ones who would create the camp and build the initial barrack buildings. It was a place which would be where civilians would be kept, where they were forced to work, but it then became a fully fledged concentration camp with a deadly element to it. The first 150 prisoners were Polish and Jews who had been arrested following the German invasion, but then as the weeks of the Second World War progressed, thousands more people were sent to Stutthof. The majority of these prisoners were Polish, but then as the war went on and the Germans took more lands, there would be people sent from all over Europe to the camp. Many were even sent from Auschwitz to work, and throughout Stutthof's time in operation, around 110,000 people would pass through the barbed wire fences from many different countries. There were resistance fighters imprisoned, as well as Soviet prisoners of war, psychiatric patients and communists sent from the Soviet Union. The main camp had around 40 different sub-camps that served it, and different prisoner populations would be held in different places, and they would be making different objects for the war effort. For example, there were women's only sub-camps, and these women were then forced to conduct slave labour for the German war effort. There were armaments factories established and set up around Stutthof and the sub-camps, and one would make aircraft parts for the Focke-Wulf, the iconic German fighter aircraft. But the conditions of Stutthof were also very terrible, and there was disease around every corner due to the poor sanitation and overcrowding. Prisoners also succumbed to starvation, and in 1942 and 1944 there were severe typhus epidemics that swept through, and ill prisoners would then be selected to be sent to the small gas chamber in the camp. The SS guards and doctors would be the ones who picked weaker inmates to go to their deaths, and many of these would be also executed in different ways. There was a firing range where Polish resistance fighters would be shot by a firing squad. It's believed that inside the small gas chamber at the camp, around 4,000 prisoners, mostly children and women, were murdered inside before the camp would be freed. But within the walls of Stutthof, there were a number of Carpos who were working and were assigned to perform different roles and tasks. The Carpos, as a system of power inside of the concentration camps, were meant to turn some prisoners upon other prisoners, and it was their role to instill fear into the hearts of the inmates, and therefore make the lives of the SS guards a lot easier, as these specific prisoner guards could then deal with the lesser issues. A number of Carpos before the war were actually criminals and violent brutes who were then recruited inside the camp to work, but the SS deemed them an important system of self-governance within the camps. Around 5 to 10% of inmates were functionaries who were given jobs and roles to do, and they were, as mentioned, despised by the other inmates. Some were spat at and were attacked as they were seen as those who were carrying out the dirty work of the SS, and they were given better treatment and more food. They would give out threats and orders to the prisoners, and also force them into humiliating punishment, They could hold whole barracks of hundreds of people responsible for slight infringements of the rules, and as mentioned, many went power mad. They were in some senses more hated than the guards, as they were seen as turncoats and traitors. Of course, many were later sent also to the gas chambers, as they were prisoners at the end of the day, but the punishment they inflicted was large in its scale. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, said of the importance of the Carpo inside of the concentration camp systems that, the moment he becomes a Carpo, he no longer sleeps with them. He is held accountable for the performance of the work, that they are clean, that the beds are well built, so he must drive his men. The moment we become dissatisfied with him, he is no longer a Carpo, he is back to sleeping with his men, and he knows that he will be beaten to death by them at the first night. They could step in to prevent exterminations and could offer some slight protection, as they often viewed the lists of the prisoners to be sent to their deaths, but there was even senior functionaries known as an over-Carpo. At the end of the Second World War, a number of Carpos who escaped slaughter at the hands of the other inmates were searched for and were looked for. A number of the brutal ones served inside of Stutthof, and they were considered as accountable for the slaughter and violent treatment of the prisoners as the SS guards were, and in late 1945 the Carpos were involved in the ruthless evacuation of the site, and huge groups of people were sent to the sea. They were then executed by machine gun fire inside the water. The Stutthof Trials aimed to bring a number of guards and Carpos to justice for their crimes, and there had been a roundup of some Carpos. Those who were taken to the court were Kopczynski, Kozlowski, Józef Reiter, Franciszek Sobczynski, Kazimierz Kowalski, Jan Brandt, Alexei Duzdal, Jan Price, and Marian Zilakowski. These men were ultimately prisoners who had been given jobs by the SS to perform. They knew that if they did not do these, then there was a very good chance they would be slaughtered themselves quicker, although they would experience even harsher treatment. But a number of these Carpos were known for their evil and brutality and collaboration, and also their violent beatings. The judges heard the cases of the Carpos, and then, following much witness testimony, they gave out different sentences to the Carpos, some more lenient than others. In the cases of Kozlowski, Kopczynski, Reiter, Sobczynski, and Brandt, these men were all sentenced to death for their crimes and actions. These wretched Carpos were the ones who had been caught executing or killing prisoners with their own hands, and they displayed a huge amount of brutality. The other Carpos during the first Stutthof trial were then given time imprisonment, and there were two who were also not found guilty of their crimes. One Carpo also died inside of prison after he had a heart attack. But those prison functionaries who were sentenced to death were held inside of the prison in Gdansk, the city of their crimes, until their execution date arrived, which was the 4th of July 1946. These men, along with a number of female guards and other SS officers, were taken to a huge set of gallows which had been constructed on the large public hill known as the Biskupia Gorka. The condemned were to be executed in the same way, and they were to be taken on the back of a truck which had been reversed under the gallows. The noose was then thrown over the gallows structure, and on the back of the vehicles with the condemned were a number of executioners and other officials. The proclamation of the death sentences were read out, and the large crowd jeered, and the condemned were then told to stand on the stool. The executioner then secured the noose around their necks. They did not use black caps or white caps to hide the face of the executed, but when stood on the stool, the vehicles they were on drove away, slowly leaving the Carpos hanging from the gallows. As they swung in the wind, their lives slowly slipped away from them, and they were left strangling and struggling. The Carpos, or prisoner functionaries, were considered a vital part of the concentration camp structure and hierarchy by the SS and by Heinrich Himmler, and he predicted that one day they would be turned upon by their fellow prisoners. Many of the Carpos were responsible for executions, and during roll call, it was they who executed prisoners for slight infringements of the camp's rules, and they also administered beatings and floggings. However, these were prisoners who were given some power, and because of this they became a figure of hatred by others. But the Carpos of Stutthof, despite a number escaping any form of justice, were punished as in front of a huge crowd, many were executed for their crimes. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.